Welcome, the anointed ones. When heaven files a case, even silence becomes evidence. Let that sink in. Because right now, God isn't whispering. He's pacing the courtroom of heaven, robes swinging, eyes blazing, and the gavel is about to fall. Not on you, on them. They thought they could torture a soul wrapped in innocence and walk away like the universe was blind. They thought spiritual crimes had no consequence, that emotional assassins get to go home clean. But here's a fact. In ancient law, the penalty for bearing false witness wasn't just shame, it was the exact punishment they tried to get for the innocent. So what happens when dozens of people team up against one chosen soul, and heaven decides it's time to balance the scales? You guessed it, mass spiritual eviction. Heaven's not playing fair, it's playing divine. And let's be honest, some of these folks are about to learn the hard way that karma isn't just a vibe, it's God's legal assistant. Oh, and if you've ever wondered whether God takes betrayal personally, especially when it's done to one of his own, buckle your seatbelt, because today, we're pulling back the curtain on what happens when divine judgment stops being delayed and starts becoming dangerous. Let's get into it. Number 1, they didn't just lie on you, they lied to the divine about you. They didn't just lie on you, they lied to the divine about you. That's why God is furious. This wasn't ordinary slander. This wasn't just someone running their mouth out of jealousy or spite. This was a spiritual attack disguised as petty gossip. They opened their mouths and rewrote your entire story, hoping no one would fact-check it, not knowing the author himself was listening. They tried to present you as guilty when you were nothing but obedient, faithful, and quiet. And worse, they thought they were convincing enough to deceive heaven. They weaponized words like daggers. They didn't say, "This person hurt me." They said, "This person is a problem." They didn't just attack what you did. They questioned who you are. And there's a difference. One is human conflict. The other is identity assassination. These people twisted your name, mocked your calling, and labeled your character in ways that stripped you of dignity, while smiling about it like it was harmless. That's why this goes beyond karma. This is now personal to God. They didn't just disrespect you. They disrespected the decision God made when He chose you. When someone smears the reputation of a chosen one, they're not just running a smear campaign. They're opposing divine judgment. You didn't appoint yourself. You didn't anoint yourself. God did that. And the moment they came after you like you were just another random person, they stepped into dangerous territory. They thought they were talking about you to others, but they were talking against you in front of the very one who sealed you. It's like someone walking into a courtroom, lying about an innocent person, and assuming the judge isn't paying attention. They didn't realize that heaven doesn't need lawyers. God is the witness, the judge, and the verdict. And when lies are told about the innocent, divine judgment doesn't ask for a rebuttal. It brings a response, a fierce one. So yes, you kept quiet. You stayed gracious. You endured. But what they forgot is, while you were silent, God was documenting, and every false word they thought they buried is now being used to dig their own spiritual consequences. This isn't just payback. This is divine correction, and it's already in motion. Number 2, they didn't mistreat you. They mocked God's selection process. They didn't just mistreat you. They mocked God's selection process. That's what makes this different. This wasn't just about personal dislike, envy, or misunderstanding. It was deeper. They weren't upset about your personality. They were angry that you were chosen, and they were not. It's not that you did something wrong. It's that your very existence as a chosen one exposed their spiritual rejection, and they couldn't handle it. They couldn't believe God would skip over them and choose someone like you. You didn't fit the image in their head. You weren't loud enough, polished enough, agreeable enough, or broken enough to be their version of worthy. They were waiting for God to choose someone they could control, applaud, or tolerate. But instead, He chose you. Quiet, real, observant, flawed but faithful, and that messed with their ego. So rather than surrender to God's decision, they tried to fight it by tearing you apart. They acted like they had the authority to override God's will. They thought their disapproval of you could somehow cancel your calling. They really believed that if enough people agreed to hate you, maybe heaven would change its mind. That's how delusional pride becomes when people think they're more righteous than God. But the more they attacked you, the more they proved why they weren't chosen. Because a true servant of God doesn't go to war with his decisions. They honor them even when they don't understand. You became a spiritual threat, not because of what you said or did, but because of who you represented. You were proof that God chooses the unseen, the overlooked, the misunderstood. You were a living contradiction to their religious performances, fake humility, and self-appointed importance. And instead of repenting, they retaliated. But now it's too late to undo what's been done. They didn't just challenge your assignment, they challenged the one who assigned it, and heaven does not take that lightly. They mocked the throne with their actions. They insulted God's wisdom. And now he's answering, not with words, with wrath. Because when people dare to interfere with divine order, they don't just get exposed, they get corrected in front of everyone. Number 3, they wanted blood, not truth, because your innocence convicted their guilt. They didn't want the truth. They wanted blood. That's what made it so dangerous. Your innocence wasn't something they just ignored. It was something they actively hated. You weren't the threat because you did something wrong. You were the threat because you didn't. You weren't chaotic, scandalous, or fake enough to fit into their mess. So instead of leaving you alone, they tried to destroy you. And not quietly either. They did it loudly, boldly, and in full agreement with one another, as if your downfall was something they were entitled to. Your purity made them uncomfortable. Your peace irritated their demons. Your ability to remain kind, grounded, and unbothered in the face of their cruelty showed them just how corrupt they had become. And they couldn't take it. You didn't need to clap back or prove anything. Just standing there with clean hands was enough to expose everything they'd been trying to hide behind fake smiles, false narratives, and forced alliances. They needed you to fall. They wanted you to snap. Because if you stayed grounded, their whole storyline collapsed. They needed something dirty on you to validate the filth they were already drowning in, but nothing stuck. You didn't give them what they wanted, and that drove them insane. So they did what broken people do. They lied, they exaggerated, they created drama where there was none. They turned their guilt into your trial. And let's be honest, some of them weren't just trying to hurt you. They were trying to erase you, wipe out your credibility, kill your influence, cancel your calling. All because they couldn't stand the fact that you walked in a level of favor they never earned. It wasn't personal, it was spiritual. And when someone is spiritually out of alignment, they will always try to crucify what's clean to feel better about what's corrupt. But God saw it. Every twisted word, every conversation behind closed doors, every trap set. And now he's responding, not because you're perfect, but because you were innocent in the face of full-blown hate. They went looking for dirt, and God found a spotless soul. And now he's demanding justice, loudly. Number 4, God sat silent. Not because he was absent, but because he was collecting receipts. They thought God's silence meant permission. They thought his stillness was a sign that he didn't care. Or worse, that he agreed with them. But what they didn't realize is that when God goes quiet, it's rarely because he's doing nothing. It's because he's documenting everything, every whispered insult, every fake smile, every lie told behind your back. Heaven wasn't ignoring it. Heaven was archiving it. You weren't being overlooked. You were being observed under protection. God didn't step in early because he knew the truth needed to reveal itself without interference. If he had interrupted the storm too soon, people would have questioned your strength. They would have thought you were rescued instead of righteous. But now there's no question. You didn't just survive it. You stayed clean through it. And while they were busy setting traps, laughing, and watching for your downfall, God was building a legal case in the spirit that none of them saw coming. Divine judgment doesn't always crash in like thunder. Sometimes it builds like a wave, silent, heavy, and impossible to outrun once it hits. God didn't forget what they did. He didn't overlook the way they treated you. He was just giving them time to repent. Not because they deserved it, but because you did. Because the mercy he gave them was his way of honoring the love you still had for some of them, even when they didn't deserve it. But that time is over now. What's coming is not emotional revenge. It's legal correction from the highest authority. And it will be precise. Because when God moves after silence, it's not with confusion, it's with receipts. Nothing will be exaggerated, nothing will be left out. Everyone involved will get their portion. And the same people who said, "If God was real, he would have stopped me," are about to learn what it looks like when God decides to respond without warning. You weren't forgotten. You were being defended in slow motion. And now the judge is standing. Case closed. Number 5. They thought they were testing you, but they were on trial. The whole time, they really believed they were testing you. Your patience, your strength, your character. They poked at your wounds, pulled at your triggers, and expected you to break down, lash out, or lose yourself. But what they never realized is that you were never the one being tested. They were. Your life, your response, your silence, it all exposed them, and heaven took notes. God didn't allow the persecution to see if you would survive. He already knew you would. You were built for it. The real purpose was to reveal them, to show exactly how much darkness they were willing to entertain, speak, and participate in when they thought there would be no consequences. Your presence was a mirror. You exposed the jealousy they tried to dress up as concern. You exposed the control they called protection. You exposed the bitterness they tried to cover with fake wisdom. They could have walked away. They could have checked themselves. They could have chosen humility, but instead they chose cruelty, and they chose it with full awareness. They ignored every opportunity to show compassion. They weaponized every vulnerability you showed. They failed the exam by proving they'd rather be right than be righteous. And that's why God is stepping in. Not because you couldn't take it, but because they couldn't be trusted with your presence. They thought this was a game. They didn't know it was an investigation. They assumed they were watching your response, when all along, God was watching theirs. How far would they go to tear you down? How far would they go to paint you as the problem? How much venom would they release in the name of truth? That's what heaven wanted to see. And now that it's been made clear, judgment is coming. Not emotional backlash, but divine accountability. They weren't exposing you. They were revealing themselves, and the mask is off for good. What they thought was your breakdown was actually their breakdown under divine observation. And now they're the ones being sentenced. Not because you asked for it, but because they earned it. Number 6, you were the lamb they slaughtered. But this time, God's not letting it be for their salvation. They treated you like a sacrifice, like the pain they dumped on you would somehow cleanse them, like if they could just break you enough, humiliate you enough, isolate you enough, maybe they'd feel better about their own darkness. They projected their guilt onto your name and convinced themselves that what they were doing was justified. They weren't just cruel, they were calculated. They gathered together, shared their lies, and acted like handing you over to the fire was some kind of necessary cleansing. But there was no redemption in their motives, only ego, only evil. They told people you deserved it. They twisted your silence into guilt, your strength into arrogance, your discernment into rebellion. They made you the scapegoat for everything they couldn't control, couldn't understand, or couldn't dominate. They didn't want healing. They wanted a target. So they picked the one who never fought dirty, the one who kept forgiving, the one who had every chance to clap back but didn't. You were innocent, and that's what made you dangerous to them. But this time, heaven is not letting it go. God's not turning this into a sermon about suffering for a greater good. This isn't about you carrying a cross so they can find grace. That door is closed. What they did wasn't holy, it was hostile. And now, your pain isn't being used for their salvation. It's being used as evidence. What they did to you has become their spiritual bill, and heaven always collects. They thought they could use you up, drain your energy, attack your name, and walk away clean. But what they didn't count on was divine reversal. God is not ignoring what happened. He's not dressing it up in religious language. He's calling it what it was: unjust, evil, abusive, and fully accountable. There will be no peace for those who bought their comfort with your destruction. They didn't just mistreat you. They abused a soul God trusted them with. And now the very pain they tried to erase is the spotlight heaven is using to expose every hidden motive, every whispered betrayal, every silent spectator. Justice isn't coming, it's already arrived. Number 7. They built their reputation on breaking yours. Now, heaven is reversing the currency. They didn't just damage your name, they used it. They turned your struggle into a storyline, your missteps into entertainment, and your healing journey into a punchline. The more they distorted your image, the more attention they got. The more they humiliated you, the more power they felt. They built their own status off your suffering, and they called it truth-telling, venting, or just being honest. But what they were really doing was harvesting influence from your downfall, and they never thought there'd be a cost. They gained sympathy, built alliances, and earned trust by turning people against you. They painted themselves as the victim, the hero, the wise one, all while dragging your name through the dirt behind closed doors. But here's what they didn't understand. God keeps receipts, and heaven doesn't just reward the innocent, it exposes the manipulators. Everything they gained through dishonor is now being reversed. The very credibility they stole using your name is starting to collapse. People are waking up. The truth that was once buried under layers of manipulation is rising to the surface without you having to say a word. Your name is being restored organically, not through revenge, not through clapbacks, but through divine orchestration. God is flipping the microphone. The same audience that once clapped for your mockers is now uncomfortable. The applause has died down. The story isn't working anymore. Because the fruit doesn't lie, and the ones who tried to ruin you are now bearing rotten outcomes. Their peace is gone, their favor is crumbling, their connections are unraveling, because what they built was never real. It was propped up on lies. You don't have to vindicate yourself. You don't have to explain. Your silence isn't weakness. It's strategy. Because while they were performing, God was preparing a divine reversal. And now their greatest shame is unfolding in the same spaces where they once tried to shame you. That's not coincidence. That's God making sure everyone sees the difference between real favor and borrowed fame. Number 8. Heaven was never neutral. It was waiting for the scales to tip. You thought God was silent because he was trying to decide who was right. But there was never a question. Heaven was never neutral. God wasn't pacing the floors of eternity wondering if maybe you had deserved it. He saw everything from the start. Every lie, every scheme, every time they smiled in your face while stabbing you in the back. His silence wasn't hesitation, it was strategy. He was letting them show their full hand. He was letting them go as far as they dared, not because he was confused, but because they were. They thought they were winning. They mistook heaven's patience for approval. They thought because lightning didn't strike them mid-lie, they were in the clear. But what they didn't know is that divine timing doesn't work like human ego. God wasn't rushing in to silence them. He was letting them build the very rope they'd hang their own credibility with. The longer they talked, the more they exposed. The more they manipulated, the deeper their trap became. And now, the scales have tipped. God was never weighing your worth against theirs. That was already settled. What he was measuring was how much injustice he'd allow before responding. And now the measure is full. The gavel is coming down. The verdict isn't confusion, it's wrath. Not the emotional kind, but the divine kind. The kind that rearranges everything. The kind that dismantles fake power structures and exposes every lie that was used to elevate the wrong people. There's no walking this back. No rebranding. No, we've all made mistakes speech that can erase what was done. The damage they caused to your reputation, your peace, your soul, it's all coming back to them now, multiplied. And not because you wished for it, not because you asked for revenge, but because God waited. And in that wait, he allowed justice to be undeniable. You don't have to plead your case anymore. Heaven already ruled in your favor. And now, the same silence that once protected them is about to judge them, publicly, completely, and permanently. Number 9. They weren't fighting you. They were fighting the version of you that God was about to release. They weren't fighting you. Not really. What they were actually terrified of was the version of you they sensed was coming, that future you. that healed you, that anointed, elevated, unstoppable version of you that would make every single lie they told crumble in the light of who you really are. They saw glimpses of your potential, and instead of celebrating it, they panicked. Because if you became what God said you would be, they'd be exposed, not just as liars, but as the insecure, manipulative cowards they truly are. So they moved fast. They tried to assassinate you before the ascension. They attacked your name before your platform could rise. They planted rumors, twisted truths, and manufactured tension in hopes that they could kill your credibility before people had the chance to see your fruit. They weren't just trying to hurt you. They were trying to erase the future. But here's the part they never counted on. God let them. God didn't stop them. Not because he agreed, but because he knew something they didn't. He knew that every attempt to bury you would only build the stage, every lie would become fuel, every betrayal would become proof. And now that they've exhausted every scheme, now is when God is raising you, publicly, authentically, unapologetically. Your rise is the answer, it's the rebuttal, it's the judgment. God didn't clap back, he created you. You became the evidence that no weapon formed against you prospered. Not one lie, not one plan, not one betrayal. And now your elevation doesn't just honor you, it condemns them. Not with revenge, but with results. Because when people watch you thrive after all the dirt that was thrown on your name, they'll realize the truth. The lies weren't strong enough, because the favor was real. And nothing terrifies your enemies more than watching you become undeniable. Number 10, they confused your mercy for powerlessness, and that was their undoing. They thought you didn't fight back because you couldn't. They saw your mercy and mistook it for weakness. They watched you stay quiet, composed, graceful, and they thought it meant you were powerless, scared, or unsure of yourself. But what they never understood is that your silence wasn't submission. It was spiritual discipline. It was divine alignment. You weren't sparing them because they were untouchable. You were sparing them because you were covered. You had every chance to retaliate. You had enough truth to expose them, enough receipts to burn the entire circus to the ground. You could have matched their energy and humiliated them right back, but something in your spirit said don't. Something said, stand still. This isn't your fight. Let God handle it. And so you did. You watched them laugh, brag, and boast like they'd won something, while all along, heaven was counting every act of restraint as righteousness on your record. They were too arrogant to see the truth. They thought because there were no immediate consequences, they'd gotten away with it. That's what pride does. It blinds people to the patience of God and convinces them they're invincible. But mercy is an approval, and delay doesn't mean denial. Mercy is God holding back judgment to give people time to repent. But when they use that delay to double down on evil, they don't realize they're digging their own grave, slowly, smugly, and with an audience. Now the delay is over. Heaven's no longer holding back. The restraint that covered them has lifted. And what's coming isn't just consequences. It's clarity. People are going to see what was hidden. The ones who laughed with them will start to question everything. Their alliances will dry up. Their words will start working against them. Because when mercy ends, exposure begins. And when exposure begins, so does the fall. They weren't unbreakable. They were just being spared because of you. But now that heaven has released the case, their protection is gone. You never needed to destroy them, you just needed to survive them. And now that survival is what's sealing their fate. Number 11. They said God won't do nothing, until they realized his delay was their death sentence. They really believed God wasn't going to do anything. They mocked your faith. They laughed at your tears. They spoke your name with boldness, thinking they'd silenced heaven with their lies. And when no lightning came, when no doors slammed shut, when you didn't come out swinging, they got comfortable, arrogant, convinced that God was either asleep or uninterested. They confused divine delay with divine disinterest, and that's where they sealed their own sentence. What they didn't understand is that when God delays, it's never because he's unsure, it's because he's stacking the weight. Thunder doesn't explode the second the sky darkens. It waits, it builds, it rumbles deep beneath the surface, stretching over time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike so the whole land hears it. That's how judgment moves. It doesn't show up just to spook people. It shows up to change the atmosphere. They thought they beat the system. They kept saying, if God was real, he'd have done something by now. But God was doing something. He was watching. He was recording. He was giving them time to undo the damage, to repent, to humble themselves. But instead of backing off, they went further. They mocked harder. They rallied more people. They didn't just sin, they recruited. And God, in his mercy, still waited. But the waiting wasn't for their benefit. It was for yours. So when the gavel finally dropped, no one could say you wished for this. No one could blame you, because you didn't have to lift a finger. Now, the echo of that thunder is rolling in. Everything they did in secret is coming to light. The people who clapped for their cruelty are now backing away. Their laughter has turned into silence. Their confidence is turning into confusion. They weren't expecting God to show up like this. Not quiet, not slow, but final. This isn't negotiation. It's retribution. Not because you demanded it, but because heaven authorized it. The same God they thought was ignoring you is now the one they can't escape. The delay they misread as safety was the very thing giving their judgment space to multiply. Now the storm has landed, and they're standing in the thunder they said would never come. Number 12. Your silence wasn't weakness. It was a legal strategy in the courts of heaven. Your silence wasn't a loss. It wasn't weakness. It wasn't passivity. It was strategy, not in the court of public opinion, but in the courts of heaven. While they shouted over you, lied about you, and twisted your every word, you kept your composure. Not because you didn't have anything to say, but because you knew who was watching. You understood something most people miss. Sometimes the loudest argument is made in stillness. Every time you chose peace over retaliation, you were building a legal case, not on earth, but in the unseen realm. What they did to you wasn't small. It wasn't harmless. It was calculated, consistent, and in some cases cruel beyond words. But instead of fighting dirty, you stayed clean. You walked away when you could have clapped back. You held your head up when they tried to bury your name. You cried, but you didn't curse. You broke in private, but you didn't lash out in public. And with every decision to stay aligned with integrity, you handed heaven more evidence. In the spiritual realm, restraint speaks volumes. Your silence documented every injustice in real time. Every sigh, every night you couldn't sleep, every moment you held your tongue became part of a divine file with your name on it. And now that file has reached heaven's courtroom, and the judge isn't debating. He's ruling. God is moving for you now because of your silence. He's not stepping in because you shouted loud enough. He's stepping in because your silence proved who you are and exposed who they are. Your quietness wasn't emptiness. It was obedience. It was trust. And now it's your weapon. The very thing they thought disqualified you is what heaven used to qualify you for divine intervention. They thought you lost. They thought you were done. But heaven saw something they didn't. A soul that refused to stoop, and a spirit strong enough to trust God even when it hurt. Now, your vindication isn't just coming, it's legally justified. Heaven isn't just defending you emotionally, it's defending you legally. The case has been reviewed, the verdict is final, and it's about to echo loud enough to silence every lie they ever told. Number 13, they tried to write you out. Now God is rewriting history with your name in gold. They thought they had the final word on your story. They thought if they erased your name from conversations, rewrote events, and spun just enough believable lies, you'd quietly disappear into the background. They wanted to reduce you to a footnote in a narrative they controlled. So they buried your truth under gossip. They crossed your name out of rooms you helped build. They whispered just enough poison to shift public opinion. And for a while it looked like it worked. People turned cold, doors closed, your character was questioned, your presence avoided. But here's the plot twist they never saw coming. God has editorial rights to your story, and heaven doesn't need their agreement to rewrite the script. Every chapter they tried to destroy is being recovered. Not just recovered, but redeemed. Your name isn't just being cleared, it's being crowned. Because when God restores, he doesn't just fix what was broken. He elevates it in front of the same audience that tried to break it. You see, this isn't ordinary vindication, this is divine editing. God isn't just correcting a few pages. He's rewriting the whole history, and the pen is dipped in justice. The ink is laced with honor. The same moments they tried to erase are now becoming the reasons you're being elevated. The same name they tried to tarnish is now being highlighted in gold, publicly, permanently. And here's the best part. Heaven isn't consulting your enemies for clearance. They don't get a vote. They don't get to edit. They don't get to add footnotes or disclaimers to the miracle God is writing with your life. All they get to do now is watch, as God exalts the very name they swore would never rise again. Your story isn't over. It was just interrupted. But God is resuming the narrative, and this next part is being written with glory, honor, and undeniable power. The people who tried to write you out are about to see your name written into rooms they'll never access again. That's not revenge. That's what happens when heaven publishes the truth. Number 14, they tried to invalidate you. Now God is demanding they publicly validate you. They thought they could get away with treating you like you were nothing and then silently moving on. They discredited you with boldness, but now they want to make peace in the dark. They whispered lies in crowds but want to whisper apologies in corners. But God is not accepting that, not this time, not after everything they did. What they don't understand is that repentance isn't just about feeling bad. It's about making it right. They didn't just hurt your feelings. They damaged your name. They tarnished your character in places you weren't even present to defend yourself. And now, God isn't asking for quiet regret. He's demanding public restitution. The same mouths that disrespected you will be required to correct the record with the same energy. They mocked you boldly. Now they'll have to honor you boldly. They convinced others to look down on you. Now they'll have to point those same people back to you and say, "We were wrong." Because spiritual justice isn't about humiliation. It's about divine balance. What was done in public must be corrected in public. Anything less would be unfinished repentance. And heaven doesn't do half healing. This is deeper than vindication. This is a spiritual transaction. It's restitution. What was taken from you in the form of respect, opportunity, and reputation must be returned, and with interest. God is not playing about your name. He saw the humiliation you endured. He watched you stay silent, still and gracious while they dragged you. And now, the gavel has dropped. Heaven's not requesting a private apology. It's demanding public validation. And they'll have a choice. Restore what they stole from your image, or deal with the judgment that follows when God has to do it for them. But one way or another, you will be honored. Loudly, clearly, powerfully. Because heaven doesn't just heal reputations, it restores honor. And when God steps in, He doesn't just defend your name, He establishes it. Let them talk. Let them spin their stories, rewrite timelines, and pretend they were innocent. Because at the end of the day, there's a judge who never missed a second of it. And now, the courtroom of heaven is no longer in recess. The gavel has struck. The verdict has been written in fire. And the truth, your truth, is about to speak louder than every lie they tried to cover you with. You weren't just attacked. You were targeted because of your light. You weren't just rejected. You were sacrificed so their shadows wouldn't look so dark. But here's what they never counted on. You were marked not for destruction, but for divine demonstration. They thought the pain would finish you. They thought their manipulation would define you. But all they did was make you undeniable. The very ashes they tried to bury you in are now becoming the ink God is using to rewrite the next chapter of your story. And it's being written in bold gold letters. This isn't just about justice. It's about reversal. It's about God flipping the very stage they tried to use against you and turning it into your platform. Not so you can scream, "I told you so," but so you can walk in undeniable proof that heaven always wins. Even if it takes a little longer than expected, you won't have to argue. You won't have to clap back. The results will speak louder than anything you could ever say. So don't shrink. Don't second-guess your worth because of people who were too broken to see it. God is moving. And this time, He's not coming as comforter. He's coming as avenger, not because you begged for it, but because he's righteous, and righteousness always corrects injustice. Your name will be restored, your story will be told truthfully, and those who thought they got away with dishonoring you will either publicly acknowledge the light they tried to snuff out, or learn firsthand what happens when heaven responds with holy fire. God is not just vindicating you, he is establishing you. So take your hands off the wheel, chosen one. This is no longer your battle, it's God's show now, and you're the headline. If this message lit a fire in your soul, if it spoke to the truth you've been carrying in silence, don't let it end here. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss another word meant just for you. Like this video to let the algorithm know that truth still matters. Drop a comment below. Tell us how this resonated, what you've endured, and how you're rising. Your voice could be the confirmation someone else needs. And most importantly, share this message with someone who's been wrongfully judged, mistreated, or silenced. Let them know heaven is not ignoring their pain. God is preparing their comeback. Let's spread this divine justice far and wide. We're not just building a community, we're building a movement. And your presence here is proof that the chosen are rising, one truth at a time.